African American community specifically, what are some of the bills that they need to be aware of that is going to affect them now, as far as the ones that are have recently been introduced this past year, and some of the ones that's on the radar that's coming up?
Yeah, I think a lot of those fall like in the category of economic development and making sure there's more opportunities for economic growth, that we've got more jobs created, more expansion of employment opportunities. When you look at the unemployment numbers in Missouri, we're just under 9%. There's no doubt that the African American community is disproportionately hit hard on unemployment numbers.
Especially the youth. That's like 50%.
Right. And so, some of the money that goes into job training and some of the other things that provide flexibility. So when you've got a company that's in Missouri and they want to expand, making sure that we've got the resources there to create those jobs if somebody wants to expand or move in. The other thing too is on some of the economic development money. I've worked with Senator Robin Wright Jones out of St. Louis and Senator Curls out of Kansas City, and in the Appropriations Committee, we've got some economic development money for job training and other things, which really hasn't been committed specifically for women and minority-owned business. But one thing we talked about doing this year, and we're going to do it, that's commit 10% of that money. Because really it's open to all comers, everybody who wants it. But trying to basically put a little incentive out there for the African American community and for women-owned businesses as well. That we're going to try and do that this year.
Statistically,
I just wanted to ask him a question on that before we get away. Now, usually that money, especially here in this central area, go through the Workforce Investment Board.
Some of the money does, yeah.
Yeah, and then that goes through the career centers,
right.
And here in Columbia, it's Central Missouri Community Action,
right.
Which now Mita and I both know that a lot of that money still do not end up in the hands of the African Americans here in Columbia. So what are you going to do differently that's going to assure that money actually, because we know that the intent is good.
Right.
And it have always been that the money was out there, and the intent was to get it to the community and like you said, women and minorities, but for some reason it haven't been really getting to that target population. So what are we going to do different to do that?
Well, I think one.
And the same aspect of that question is what we've seen in the past is that some of the cities who have success with minority businesses, in Columbia we're 12%, less than 1% minority business, but it's actually in the charter, but it's in the law of a certain percentage is there to support that. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, okay, so for example, on the budget, the Appropriations Committee, we've got to give the authority, appropriate the money before anybody can spend it, but we can't legislate in an appropriation bill. So, for example, going through the Finance Board, there's a law that says that's the way it goes. So I can't change that in the budget process. I can say the amount of money that goes through, but I can't change the process. I think the thing there is to go back and look at that whole structure and how the law set that up. Because you and I have talked about this, and I know there's a real problem there.
Sure. And that's what Almeida been, and I learned this from her, and she taught me a lot. She's my mentor because she knows more about it, and that's something that I didn't realize that to us it was like we wasn't getting any of the money, and we wasn't. But it wasn't because the money was not
available
so
and
supposed to be.
You tell these institutions, here's the money, but you can't tell them, you can't make them accountable or how they spend it.
Well, we can. I mean, we can look, and what we can tell them is, okay, we're going to look at how you spent it last year, and if we don't like the way you spent it, then we're just going to give you less or not give you anything. But the problem with that is some of that money is making its way out there, and the last thing you want to do is
cut the money. You can't get it back.
So who's in charge of making sure that the money is distributed?
Okay,
efficiently
this is a frustrating part too, because what we do, because that's somebody had a bill and it got passed and created Missouri Development Finance Board, and then you've got a board it's a board made up of individuals who are put on the board, and we really don't in the General Assembly have any control over that. And then once we give them the money, they make the determination. But we don't, other than going back and looking at how they spent the money and either giving them more or less money in the future, we don't have a lot of ability short of changing that law on what they do. And sometimes, because that's not the only board or commission that we have that problem with. It happens all the time.
So is it the people who have the power?
Well, you need to,
ultimately?
ultimately yes, but you need to make sure that the board, has solid people on it.
And see, that have been the problem. It's always been the same usual suspect, as Almeida said, that sits on these boards. And that's somehow we're going to have to get more representations on these boards.
Because if you have a committee, like your committees, if there's somebody that's not performing, if the work's going to have to get done, so that means the other senators are going to have to do it. And do you go to the senator and say, hey, we really need you to kind of step up and do this? Do you need an assistant? Or, have you had those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's the issue that we're talking about. And I hear that a lot. I know like 5 people that are sitting on 5 different boards, and I was like, how do you go about this process of selecting?
Well, and different boards, the members are chosen differently. I mean, some of these boards established in state law, the governor gets to pick. Some of them, the board hires their own people, and there's a lot of different processes. So you got to look at what it is on the board. But all of these positions generally have those board members have a term. Most of them tend to be 4 years. Some of them are 6. But the key is on one of those boards. I mean, if something's really out of whack, then you got to go and you got to change the law and how it's structured. But if it's just that you have people on the board that aren't doing what the people who are supposed to work with the board and benefit from what the board does don't like them, then you've got to get engaged and get different people on the board. So you got to and all of this stuff is public record.
Sure.
And so looking at how long somebody's been on a board, what their term is, when their term's up, what the process is for getting somebody else on there. So the key is, if you don't like what a board is doing, get the list of who's on the board, and then look at when their terms are up. And then whoever it is that appoints the people to that board, start working them hard and say, hey, I know an opening's coming up on this board in May, and I want to be on that board, or I've got somebody that I want you to put on that board, and that's how you work it. It's a problem universally with boards and commissions like this is, somebody had a good idea at one point and it got started, but then they tend to take on a life of their own, and after so many years, the board might not even be doing what initially it was set up to do, and that can always be a problem.
But they still have to, it's almost like the same thing you're saying, dealing with your fellow senators in the House, you still have to be professional and work with them.
Right.
In that process, and I think that's something that going through these steps, we could definitely remember.
And remember, a board like this, which is a state-created board, everything they do is subject to the Sunshine Law. So remember, all their meetings have to be posted at least 24 hours in advance. And the subject matter, they have to put on an agenda. So if they're going to have a meeting, say next week, and they're going to talk about 3 or 4 things, they've got a list when they post it, what they're going to talk about. And so that's another problem that we've got in this state with a lot of these boards and commissions, where they don't always follow the Sunshine Law. And the state auditor just came out with a report and just basically said that the state of Missouri, with the creation of a lot of these things, has just done a horrible job in making sure that everybody complies with the Sunshine Law. And I've dealt with this myself, because I've worked with people who haven't gotten documents and haven't been told about meetings and things like that in my capacity as a lawyer. And it's hard, and whether it's a municipality or a county or a board like that, but you know what? There are fines and penalties for board members who don't comply with the Sunshine Law. Right. So, if you put somebody on notice and say, hey, you've got to post this meeting, you've got to post the subject matter of what you're going to talk about, and they don't do it, there is some personal liability, and those fines can go up to $500. So there's some basis there to hold people to what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, thank you, Senator. We're going to take a real quick break for...
We've had you talking for about 30 minutes. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
We start talking about this stuff, it goes by pretty fast.
So we're going to have this public announcement. So let's just go right into that.
You are just clicking.
Okay.
It should play.
Radio crew come and experience cultural events.
Never mentioned before, St. Rob.
Hi, good to see you.
Pleasure to see you too. I was briefly with one of your colleagues last night, your next door neighbor,
Who's that?
Maria Chappelle Madonna.
Oh yeah, yeah. She is my neighbor. Office right next door.
Neighbor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she's in the office right next to me. She was filibustering a bill a couple weeks
Señor
back.
Vives,
Yeah.
¿qué estás haciendo
She's
en
got,
mi
she's got
clase?
a dog that she keeps in the office, and the dog knows how to open the door. And so twice I was like coming in and out of my office, and her dog literally opened the door and was escaping, and I had to put her dog back.
All right, you're listening to Straight Talk and KLP in Columbia, and if you tuned out, we thank you for tuning back in and staying right here with us. And today's guest is State Senator Kurt Schaefer, and my name is Tyree Bindum, and of course we got Lorenzo Lawson on the helm today.
Yes.
So Lorenzo is going to be here solo next week. I'm going to go in St. Louis and take my daughter to see at the Fox to play Bring It On for cheerleaders. So we're going to have a daughter-daddy day.
I wish I could go
No,
with
he's
you.
good.
Senator Schaefer, just getting back to that board situation thing.
Man.
What I wanted to, I want the public to understand something too, that, in my opinion, that what really is happening is that there's groups of people that's knowledgeable about certain things. And usually what happens when these boards are picked, they usually pick people that they think that's got the education, that's got the knowledge, that's going to bring something to the board, intellectual, that studies and know about this area. But I think what they fail to realize is that they don't have the voice from the community that can chime in and say, wait a minute, I understand that you guys know about this, but you're not really understanding how that's going to affect us.
Right.
And I think that for some reason, in some way, we never did get that into law, that there should be at least one community person on each and every one of those boards. Whether they are a professor, that's not necessarily who we want on the board. We want some folks that may not have a college degree, that lives in the community, may not be making $50,000 or $75,000 a year, but they are everyday people and they can bring a voice to those boards. How do we get that accomplished?
On the Development Finance Board, I can't remember if the law requires anybody specific. I don't think that it does off the top of my head, but I may be wrong. But some of the boards and commissions, they have seats that are supposed to be people from different communities or different backgrounds. So we do that, and we do it on some of them. It's just again, you may get somebody from with that basis, but it still doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily vote or do things the way you think they're going to do them. The key is it's like you said. My headphones are up there.
And that's only if people call it.
It's a short right there.
Sorry about that.
That's right.
We do
It's
have
on-
a
it's on,
caller.
it's working now. So anyway, again, like you said earlier, people are people, and before you put somebody in a position like that, you try and just figure out who they are and what they're going to do, regardless of their background. And chances are, like you say, they may have a background that makes them more likely, to have a certain viewpoint. But sometimes you get somebody on a board and they don't, and so then you've got to watch and see. And if they're not doing, what you think they ought to be doing, then the key is to wait till their term's up and get somebody else.
Exactly.
You can go ahead and click them in.
Well, they done hung up.
But I've filled out for different boards quite a few times.
They're done
And
calling.
and you really have to have thick skin because
Thank you for calling. Can you? This is Almeida.
and that was the example.
I know this is really your heart. On which board was that, Almeida? On the family, children. Oh, on the partnership board. Yeah. Okay. or you was appointed by the governor? Okay, then that's one way, huh?
The governor, I like the way you said that.
Okay, and now, Kurt, can you appoint?
No, but generally what happens is some boards the governor can just appoint people to, but most of them that the governor makes the appointment, it has to go through Senate confirmation.
Oh, okay.
Which means that there's a committee.
Checks and balance.
Yeah, so if let's say the governor wants to appoint somebody from Boone County to a board, and it's one that requires Senate confirmation, they're going to come to me and ask me, because you have to be sponsored by the senator from the district where you live. So if the governor wants to put somebody on a board and I don't want them on the board, I won't sponsor them, and they're not going to get. That means they can't go through that Senate process. But the flip side of that is, there's so many of these boards and commissions, and it's hard to find people willing to put in the time. And so
it's all volunteer, right?
Right. But some of the boards get paid, but only a few. Most of them are volunteer. So the flip side of that is, if you know of an opening on a board, and you have somebody that wants to go on that board, did you say you've been up for a couple boards? You should have told me, because I'd help you out. Because in that situation,
Yeah, I'll apply to the process.
well, then I'll go to the governor. I'll write the governor a letter and say, hey, I know there's an opening on this board, and I would like you to put this person on the board. Now, sometimes the governor will listen to me, and sometimes he won't.
Sure.
The governor does whatever he wants, but they're also looking for good people to serve on boards, and people that are willing to put in the time.
Sure.
So a service from the community in looking at this would be to make sure that you have a list of human resources of individuals who are willing to serve in that capacity, who have the ability
Right.
to do so.
Yeah.
And that would be something that
That would actually be really good.
Actually do.
Yes.